Okay, so this time we're going to look at a different way of bringing the data into Excel. So what I want to do, opening Excel, I want to select the blank workbook. I should save it soon, give it a name, but the data input is going to come from this data tab. So I'm not looking at file open anymore. I'm not going down that route. I'm going to data, and this will vary slightly according to the exact version of Excel you're using, but I'm looking for this box here that has get and transform, and I'm going to make a connection and bring some data in through PowerQuery. So again, this varies by version of Excel, but if I select the drop down new query, it says I can bring data in from a file. That's what we're going to do. I can bring it in from a variety of databases. I can bring it in from a variety of other data sources. I can even combine queries if I need to. So this is a general way of connecting to a huge variety of data sources. We're just going to demonstrate it by bringing in some data from a file, from a workbook or from a CSV file. So here we've been looking at the Stats 19 Accident 2020 CSV, so we'll carry on with that, and I'll say that I want to bring some data in from a CSV. So I have to navigate and find that CSV. This is sort of familiar routine. That's the CSV file that I'm interested in, and I press the import button. Very briefly, it tells me that it's setting up a connection, and then I get a preview of the data that we're trying to load. If I trust the guesses that Excel's made, and it tells us what it's doing now, it tells us based on what it sees in the first 200 rows, it's going to guess what the data types are. Could change that and insist it does a better job, but for interest we'll just carry on. It's guessed that the delimiter's the comma and sorted it into fields, but to see the Power Query menu, we're going to hit this middle button, this transform data button, and that opens up for us a new menu, and we have a whole set of extra functionality to do with transforming and preparing data that we might want to bring in. So one of the things I want to do is this accident index. We can see it's helpfully telling us, the little 1, 2, 3 is telling us it's turned it into a number. So I'm going to right click on that, and I'm going to say change type and change it to text. So follow the drop down menus and say I want that to be a text, and then it points out that that column already has a type conversion going on. So Excel had decided to turn general data into a number. I'm saying no, turn it into a text. So that's because I don't want the data being wrecked by the number conversion. So I do indeed want to replace the current operation. And I do that, and I have my accident index. I could then decide that I don't want all the columns to be imported. So for instance, here we have Ordnance Survey grid references. That's very UK specific geographical format for eastings and northings, and in the next column I've been given longitude and latitude. And I could make any kind of choice here, but I could decide to only keep one of those data sets. So perhaps everything I do, I think I'm going to work with Ordnance Survey grid reference, so I can remove these columns. And that the whole point about what we're doing here is we're building a connection to that CSV. We will change nothing in that CSV file. We're just going to connect to it, and we're building up a set of instructions as to how that data is manipulated through that connection to Excel. And if I go over to the right hand side, we can see the steps that are going on in the data changes. And I can be a little bit more informative, so I could rename that column, and I could say remove lat and lon. The previous one, if you remember, we had to to change it. So in the previous step, I could rename that and say accident index to text, so that I've got some informative labeling. If we click on the previous step, what it's done is it's seen the first row and decided they're column headers, so it's made them column headers for us. If I didn't like the choices that it was making, I can amend that through various options up here. Go back and look at that. But this is one of the powerful tools of the PowerQuery, because I have a set of applied steps that describe the manipulations that are being carried out. So I'm no longer reliant on the Excel expert getting my data ready for me, and they're right clicking, they're left clicking, they're triple clicking, they're copying, they're pasting. I have a set of instructions, and if this is done sensibly, they even have some useful labels that tell me what the steps are. I could look at that next year if I was updating the data and say, oh, why did we do that? Why didn't we do that? There's enough explanation in those applied steps that in itself it adds to the quality of the data processing. If we go back, the transform option, again, this gives me a whole lot of really powerful extra features. If I want to do manipulations, I could possibly code up, turn the 1s to fatal, the 2s to serious. I could do that here if I wanted, but I don't. I'm going to save that all for later. And again, on the top menu, if I didn't like the choice of using the first row as headers that was made automatically, again, I can change that. Very, very, very powerful set of data manipulations. You will see also that it has its own programming language. So we can build a set of applied steps just by using the various menu options. But again, if we want to get far more powerful with it, we can approach it through this programming language, if we ever wanted to. Anyway, when we're done, we haven't done much here. We've insisted that accident index is a text field, and we've removed a couple of columns. And when we're finished, I can just say close and load, and it will run the query. And here we go. It's telling us there are 9,329 errors. So it's loaded, it's brought the data in, tells us something about what it's done, but it's telling us there are a lot of errors in our data. Now, I can go and view this in more detail if I wish, to try and figure out what the errors are. So this takes me to another PowerQuery editor that lets me explore the errors in more detail. However, I know what the problem is, so I can click on the upper row here of the query and go back to my PowerQuery, and I happen to know the problem is that the accident index has text in it, the accident reference also has text in it. So if I go back to the step where I'm doing the notice, it's just visible. I'll move that over, and I'll move that over. If I go back to the step where we changed accident index to step, so promote headers, everything is just, if you look, everything is ABC, it's all in a general format. The next step, when we insisted that accident index was text, if I make sure that's highlighted in my applied steps, I can then go to accident reference, right click up there, and I can say change type and make that text. And again, it says, do you want to insert a step? Because we're going back and editing the query, we're going to insert a step at point 3 in our applied steps. So I'll say yes, and then it tells us the same thing it told us with accident index. The selected column has a type conversion. Do we want to replace the existing conversion? And yes, we do, because PowerQuery is turning that column into a number, and we know that's the wrong thing to do. So we're going to replace the current, turn it into text, and maybe I should now edit the step, accident index and accident reference to text. So informative, remind myself another time, and now if I press Control and load, it brings the data in, and hopefully there will be no errors this time. So I now have, the point is, we now have the raw data in one safe place in the CSV file, and we're reading a connection into it, and that connection is able to carry out a lot of the manipulations. It's dropped some columns. It's insisted some other columns come in a particular format, a text format, and if we ever want to in the future, we can go back and edit that. So if I open up the query editor and I go to the first step, if I press on the gear icon, it will say that's the file that you wanted to open. So if this is now 2021's data, because here we've only loaded 2020's data, I can browse. If I had 2021 data, I could select that file instead and run the same set of transformations. So we're beginning to introduce some automation. So there's the potential for automation, and there's the potential for quality assurance, because we've got this almost aid memoir which is human readable. Anyway, I don't want to make any changes. So we now have data within Excel, only it's in Excel in table form. And I can do all the kinds of things that we were doing before. I can go back, I can add my VLOOKUPs if I want to interpret some of these variables. This table is given a name already. I might want to name the worksheet specifically, but I am now, when I need to save this data set. So let's save this, and I'll save it in stats 19, and I'll call it the PowerQuery loaded data. Name as good as any. And the point is, the one big point, I have now separated raw data from working data. So if I do decide I found an error, if I make changes, the raw data is always the same. And the trick is to use the PowerQuery editor to do as much of the data manipulation we need to do as possible.